Welcome, everybody. Our plan tonight is to finish chapter 15, which I think we should be able to do in about 50 or 55 minutes. Next week, we will touch on chapter 16 and some roundup things for the book. Let's begin with 1 Corinthians 15. Let's just get right into the book if we can this evening. So the chapters so far has really involved the resurrection in three ways. The resurrection in general, the resurrection then of Christ, and now our resurrection, the resurrection of our body. And we're moving from the one, from Christ, into the resurrected human body next. So let's get through some really interesting verses and some verses that we use all the time. I spoke many verses from this chapter yesterday at what's the fort's name? The big cemetery, Fort Snelling, miles long up in the Twin Cities. We had a burial there yesterday. I drove up to do a burial up there. So let's begin at verse 28. But when all things have been subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to the one who subjected all things to him, in order that God may be all in all. This is a curious passage because you have, in one sense, the Son finally handing everything off to the Father. When does that happen? Well, we kind of say it in the Creed. What are in the second article of the Apostles' Creed, where do we kind of land? He ascended into heaven. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. And there is where then, after that takes place, this happens. The Son hands everything off to the Father. And then incidentally, the Bible talks this way about the Father then kind of handing everything back to the Son to glorify and praise the Son. So we have, what we have is the Father and the Son almost racing to out-subject one another. I will give you this. Oh, no. You take this. Really, you take this. No, you go ahead. There are, without any of the comedy elements, you almost have two guys arguing over which one gets to hold the door for the other. Right, that's what's really happening here. But the Father and the Son, in complete reverence and respect and delight and love for one another, subjecting all things. But the Son does give everything back to the Father finally. So who's in charge? Well, the Father gets it, and the Son then has dominion. There's kind of a co-reign then. Father, Son, and Spirit in heaven. Because guess who else gets to take part in the reign in heaven? All of us. All of us. So it's almost as if there are no subjects. Because if everybody reigns, then and without any sin, that can happen. It can only happen without any sin. Verse 29 and 30. Otherwise, what will those people do who get baptized for the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why do they even get baptized for them? Why do we live in danger every hour? 30 should really go with 31, but can we just talk about baptism for the dead? You ever heard of this? Here, right? And there are, to my thinking, kind of sort of three ways of thinking about this, maybe four. So can I give you my three, and then if you have one, chime in, because I'd love to hear it. Because can you guess that my answer is kind of going to be, I'm not so sure what's going on here, but let's talk about this. If this is an Orthodox baptism for the dead, I think that's a big word. What does Orthodox mean?
Church name, or authorized.
Authorized, straight teaching, correct teaching, in line with doctrine. You never want to go to a heterodontist. You only want to go to an orthodontist. An orthodontist straightens your teeth. A heterodontist would crooked your teeth. So go to an orthodontist and don't go to the heterodontist ever. So heterodox teaching is crooked teaching. Orthodox teaching is straight teaching. So baptism for the dead, I just went through all of them. Okay, whoa. How do we, okay, that's how the technology works. Number one, baptism at the grave. Baptism kind of before the dead. The earliest Christian church for which we have archaeological evidence from about the year 100 to about the year 400. So from the 2nd to 5th century, the Christian church for a while under the Romans was an underground church. And by underground, I mean underground literally. So places like Lyon, or Lyons in France, Paris, certain places in Germany and in Austria, Metz, I'm thinking, and Mecklenburg, and there were places, certainly in Italy and Rome itself, where the Christians were being persecuted and could not find places to worship above ground. So they went below ground. And in those cities, large European cities, especially around the Aegean, in Italy and in Greece, you're built on rock. That's ancient volcanic rock. And there's no way to really go underground for a single grave. But cities found tunnels and expanded them and made catacombs. And the Christians worshiped in these tunnels where the burials took place. And the hallway outside of the widening where you would hold your church service was a bone room. And we are pretty sure that we get the word narthex from that concept, a bone room. Come on in and grab a seat. We're in 1 Corinthians 15. Those are not Bibles. If you'd like one, you can have one of these. Those are dogmatics textbooks. Sorry. But I have all the slides have the verses on them. So the second possibility for baptism for the dead. I didn't even talk about this today. So that would be, where did the baptisms happen? And archaeologically, the only baptismal fonts that have been found in the catacombs have been in a narthex outside of a worship space where the graves are, and usually looking like something low recessed into the floor. Does anybody have a basement shower stall where you really just kind of have a lip and a curtain going around it? Or I suppose a bird bath if it's sitting on the ground would be the same kind of a deal. That was a baptismal font. Also a reason to understand that baptisms were not by immersion in the earliest church, because none of the fonts are any more than 2 or 3 inches deep. And it doesn't matter how young the infant is, you're not going to get an immersion going on. So it would be somebody probably kneeling, and then the baptizer kneeling with scooping up the water, or using a pitcher. A Greek pitcher is called an amphora, and just pouring water out over the head of the individual. Some of them may have had running water coming out of a rock or somewhere there, but most probably not. So baptism, Luther thought, and the early church thought, baptism for the dead, baptism where the dead are. Why do you baptize out where the dead are? That was just a way of talking about it. Well, maybe. I'm just giving you 3 possibilities for this term. The second one is a baptism of suffering for the benefit of the souls of the dead. That would be somebody who wants to pray for the souls of the dead, would scourge themselves, take a whip or something, and beat themselves while they're praying for the souls of the dead, except that this was unknown until the late medieval period. Not really until the monastic period is really in full flower, I'll say, not long before Luther's time, the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, did this kind of thing even come up. So would James even have thought about praying for the souls of the dead? I kind of think maybe not. And certainly not a baptism of suffering, because that's not a baptism at all. That's just beating yourself. We have the phrase in English, a baptism by fire. It's not really a baptism at all, is it? That's just, what that means is an introduction to a new, career or something with a lot of trouble right at the beginning. That's a baptism by fire. And what would that be? Well, the third one might be a baptism on behalf of the dead. Today, common, I think, only in Mormon circles. We used to have a staff member who, as a young man in high school, dated a Mormon. And he often would tell us things that she told him about Mormonism. And he had really got to be kind of an expert on Mormonism. And one of the things that Mormon young people do is they get names of people who have died, and then if they weren't Mormon, they baptize them into the Mormon church. And that's essentially one kind of a youth group meeting in the Mormon church. The kids get handed a new name. They say the name out loud, and then the minister or the youth leader, they'll have a dunk tank there. They get in, they get immersed and baptized in the name of that person. I baptize you, oh George Washington, in the name of the, and go on and on and on and on and on. Does everybody know that the Mormons do a lot of genealogical research? This is why, is so that they can, in theory, baptize everybody because they have baptism for the dead. Should I care that the Mormons might someday baptize me the way that a couple years ago they baptized Martin Luther? No, I don't really care. And would it be wrong for me to utilize Mormon genealogical research to enhance my knowledge of family history? No, I don't think I would care. I have a very strong suspicion that Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, was the brother of my ancestor. And I think, did I even talk about that last time or the time before? So the family branches diverge at about 1830. The Mormons under Joseph Smith went to Nauvoo, Illinois. My family went to Columbia County, Wisconsin, the same year. So out of the same county in New York State. The other possibility, of these three, by the way, baptism at the grave, baptism for the souls of the dead, baptism on behalf of the dead, the one that seems the most likely, if this is an Orthodox practice, is just a baptism at the grave. But could James be talking about an unorthodox practice? For example, if I go back to the verse, I'm going the wrong way. What will those people do who get baptized for the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why do they even get baptized for them? Would this verse make sense if James is talking about an unorthodox but semi-Christian teaching where people who believe in the resurrection but misunderstand baptism? And James is saying even they baptize, and even they believe in the resurrection of the dead. They're doing it for nothing if there's nothing to it. So he might be talking that way. Anybody have an opinion about these? I can't do much more. We don't have much more. And as I said, the ancient church really thought this first one. And it was only in the Middle Ages when this second one kind of sprung up after, and James certainly had never read the Apocrypha, so he didn't know anything about praying for the dead. Jeff?
We're talking about Paul, right?
What did I say?
James.
I keep saying James, don't I?
Yeah.
I'm writing about James in the morning and I'm teaching Paul in the afternoon. I'm sorry. It is really getting to me.
My question is, it turns on the preposition for.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does Greek do with that?
On behalf of is the usual way of taking it.
Okay.
Yeah, for the sake of.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be for in the sense of before. Chris, did I leave out my Bible program? I, of course, did not. Can I do this without losing the whole class? Are we still on? Okay, hold on. I don't know why that didn't work. What are we, no, it's 1 Corinthians 15 what? What's 29? Baptized for the dead. Hyper, preposition with genitive, on behalf of, for the sake of, in favor of, but also on the side of or concerning. So there are a couple of, but on behalf of probably is the most likely. So an unorthodox teaching is the most likely. Yeah. There, I've got my notes back now. Okay, let's move on. Paul says, day by day, I face death, as surely as I boast about you, brothers, in Christ Jesus our Lord. Did Paul face death? Sure. Most famously, up in Galatia, he got stoned almost to death and left for dead. And then he says, if I fought wild animals in Ephesus with human motives, what good did it do me? If the dead are not raised, then let us eat, drink, and let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. It's a classic Epicurean statement. Let us eat, drink, really, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Did Paul really fight wild animals in Ephesus? You know, he says he did. Why would there be any reason to exaggerate the troubles Paul went through? Why use a hyperbole if he didn't? And it could be easily verified. Ephesus is just across the Aegean from Corinth. Any traveler could talk about whether this happened or not. And there are other instances of people surviving the arena as they faced animals, wild animals. Can you think of anybody who faced wild animals and wasn't killed by them? Lynn? David? Daniel in the lion's den. Sentenced to it. There are people who fight wild animals out in the world, but in the arena. There's also a story going around exactly at Paul's time by a guy named Appian, who wrote that this man under Caligula named Androcles faced a lion in the arena and survived. And when Caligula asked him, why didn't that lion tear you apart? Androcles said, well, when I was in North Africa fighting the Punic War or whatever it was, I met a lion that was charging, but it was limping. I grabbed its paw. I pulled out the thorn from its paw. And, Emperor, I think this might be the same lion. I think he was lying. Androcles, that is. Because my suspicion is that the slaves that were there tended the animals in the arena that were going to be in the arena. And therefore, any slave might have, if he had that job, might have had the opportunity to get along with the lions. And therefore, a lion came out at him and he might have been able to stop it because it recognized him. And would it do him any good to tell the truth to the emperor if his wife or son or brother or best friend now had the job of tending the lions and might get away with the same trick? So he comes out with this, I pulled a thorn out of its paw story. So, however, that had happened. Caligula, was only 37 to 41. Paul's writing now in the early 50s or mid 50s. So this would be a fresh story and people would recognize it. Also, this incident with Paul, of course, and later, this is actually a couple centuries later, there was an emperor who didn't last long, Gallienus, and his wife had been duped by a guy. She wanted to buy gemstones, and the salesman sold her glass. And the emperor sentenced him to damnatio ad bestias, which means judgment by the beasts. And the emperor had the ability to choose which beasts will it be. Will he be attacked by snakes, by lions, by leopards, or elephants? What will it, bears? What will it be? Well, the emperor got to decide. And this guy who had done this forgery, he gets out there. Can you imagine? The gate is being cranked up by the soldiers. There are people all around you. You're there kind of in the sand, and you're thinking that these are my last moments on earth. I'm about to be torn apart. Please, O lion, go here first. Please kill me before you eat me, or something like that. And what comes out? A rooster. I don't know if this is the correct assumption or not, but Gallus is Latin for rooster, and Gallienus was the name of the king. But what the king said was, you committed a forgery for my wife, and I just committed a forgery on your death sentence. But I suspect that maybe the wife wanted the diamonds. So don't kill him. Make him give me back you can sentence him, but I want the jewels. So I don't know, but it's an interesting story. So do not be deceived. Keeping bad company corrupts good morals. Use sober judgment as is right, and do not sin, for some have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame. So Paul quotes evidently either Euripides or a playwright who lived 100 years after Euripides named Menander. And people often think it's Menander, but it could have been Euripides. Menander, 300s, Euripides, 400s, so whichever one. But the quote is, keeping bad company corrupts good morals. And remember, we're using the Evangelical Heritage Version here, so it might not be what your translation says. But do you have it there? In verse 33, what does the NIV say? Bad company corrupts good character. Just another translation of the same words. And then Paul says, by the way, it's not the only time that Paul maybe quotes from some Greek poet or something like that. One of the more famous ones. But he says, use sober judgment. Some have no knowledge of God. Some of the people you pal around with don't know about God. Are they good examples to follow? Maybe not the best. So I say this to your shame.
You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.